Who else could it be but me, your man, Louie T? Welcome to this Bleacher Report exclusive here on behalf of Bleacher Report, talking about Washington Commanders all-time roster. So we're going to build an all-time roster for the Washington Commanders / Redskins / football team organization. This one was a fun exercise. I'm not gonna lie to you. I really enjoyed doing this. It forces you to go back and dig into the history of the team. I fancy myself as a history buff of this organization in particular, but just the NFL in general. But specifically this organization, you learn so much when you do exercises like this. And so I really did enjoy doing this. There were some tough decisions that I had to make. There were certain criterias, and I'll kind of go through those as we go through the list of players that ended up making this list. And how I'm going to go about this is I'm going to do it maybe differently than others. I'm going to go and put together a 53-man roster. Okay, so that's the exercise that we're going to go through today. And you can tell me if you disagree with the list, if you agree with the list, who would you take off? Who would you put on? There were some honorable mentions. I may mention some of those players as we go through. I'll give you my thought process as to how I came up with, certain position groups and the players that are on that list of players on at that position, things of that nature. So with that said, let's get the process started. I want to start first by saying with this 53-man roster and this all-time Commanders roster, I'm going to also let you know that the head coach of this team is none other than Joe Jackson Gibbs, of course, best coach in franchise history, won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks. His offensive coordinator is going to be Joe Bugle. Even though Joe's going to be calling the plays, Joe Bugle is going to be the de facto offensive coordinator, offensive line coach, et cetera, et cetera. Got to have Bugs on the staff. And of course, our guy, Richie Pettibone, will be manning up the defensive side of the football. So with that said, let's get to the 53-man roster. We start on the offensive side of the football. We have 28 players. So as you can see, I spent the vast majority of my spots on the offensive side of the football. I really had intended on going 25, 25, 3. That was my goal initially. And then unfortunately, it kind of got a little out of whack. And honestly, the tougher decisions to me came on the offensive side, not the defensive side of the football. So take it for what it's worth. So with that said, we start with the quarterback position. I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. Doug Williams, we'll get to him in a second, but I got 4 quarterbacks on my all-time roster for the Washington Commanders. You got Sammy Baugh, Sonny Jurgensen, Joe Theismann, and Doug Williams. Slinging Sammy Baugh is the number 1 quarterback here. He'd be the starter. Again, you're talking about one of the greatest quarterbacks, not in just franchise history, but in NFL history. Sammy Baugh was a one-of-a-kind guy that is actually 3rd all-time in franchise history in interceptions as well. This guy punted, he played defense, and he was the starting quarterback, if you can believe that. And again, he, at a time when the forward pass wasn't really as evolved, obviously, as it is now, was, to me, the father of the forward pass. He was literally slinging it back in the day, and his numbers kind of still stand up to today's NFL standards. So Sammy Baugh would be the quarterback of this team. Sonny Jurgensen would be his backup. Both of those guys are in the Hall of Fame. Joe Theismann, one of the few, if not the only quarterback in franchise history to win league MVP. And then Doug Williams was a Super Bowl MVP and the first Black quarterback to win a Lombardi trophy. So I think the quarterback group is pretty much self-explanatory. I'll just say this about Doug Williams. You don't win Super Bowl 22 without him, and him being the first black quarterback means a lot to win the Super Bowl. I had to pick between him and Sam Huff. I'm big. One of my criteria is you really needed to be considered a Redskin throughout your career. You needed to be considered a part of this organization. Like when you retire, who are you synonymous being a part of their organization, right? Sam Huff is a giant to me. He'll always be a giant. That's just me. I know when he retired, he worked with the Redskins broadcast crew and team, and he was considered a Redskin. But if you look at his career, Sam Huff was a giant. Doug Williams is a Redskin. Point blank, period. Commander. He is a part of this organization. So I went with Doug over Sam Huff. There are situations where I had to make exceptions for certain players because they were frankly too good, and their time here in Washington, albeit brief, was just too good, right? So moving on to the running back position, I've got 4 running backs. I've got Larry Brown, John Riggins, Brian Mitchell, Clinton Portis. So my starting running back here is John Riggins. Normally, how I list the players is by era. So when they played from the oldest to the most current. So that's why they're in that order. But Riggins is the starting back here. I love this group because they all bring something different to the table. Riggins is going to be the physical bruising back. He also has a little bit of speed. Don't sleep on John's speed. Riggo can go, right? But CP is going to provide us with the speed aspect, the guy that has the home run ability. Brian Mitchell is going to be an all-purpose dynamo. He's going to be my kickoff and punt returner, which is why he's on this roster. And then Larry Brown can just do a little bit of everything. Really good out of the backfield, catching the football, was elite at catching the ball out of the backfield. As a player in a day where running backs didn't really catch the football, he set a record at the time as a rookie with 53 catches. And I think he had over 1,500 yards his rookie season. Over 800 of them were receiving yards. So Larry Brown, a very unique back that I think fits this group as well. So you're looking at a group, 3 out of the 4 guys on this list of backs are among the top rushers in franchise history with Brown, Riggins, and Portis. So again, I think that list of running backs sort of self-explanatory, and we all know what Brian Mitchell is as an all-purpose dynamo. Should be in the Hall of Fame strictly off of his all-purpose yardage. Wide receiver. So this was really interesting. It wasn't hard, right? I think this was the list. I think Ricky Sanders was the one guy you could argue here, but I'll give you my thought process behind it. So I've got 6 receivers. Bobby Mitchell, first black player in franchise history. That doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of his impact here with this organization. First of all, that in itself puts him on the list. But second of all, he was a damn good player that was way ahead of his time. This man had a season, I want to say it was 1963. We had over 1,400 yards receiving in 1963, right? Like, are you kidding me? Those types of numbers are what guys are posting now. He did that in a 14-game season. So again, Bobby Mitchell was a different dude. Okay, he was an absolute stud. Charlie Taylor, another really good receiver in this franchise's history. Actually started out as a running back, converted over to wide receiver, was dominant as a running back, was even better as a wide receiver, put up some crazy numbers for this organization. So obviously he is on this list as well. Arthur Monk, we all know about Art Monk, Hall of Fame player. This is a guy that leads the organization in catches, yards, etc. he retired as the NFL all-time leader in receptions. So we all know what Art Monk's all about. So again, I really don't need to explain why he's on this list. Gary Clark, another awesome receiver. You could make an argument that he should be in the Hall of Fame with the numbers that he posted throughout his career. He had some monster years for this organization. And again, when you're talking about yards in this organization from a receiving standpoint, he's close to the top of the list, is Gary Clark. So big years in some of those impactful championship seasons. He had a number of massive seasons. I think he had 4,000 or 5,000 yard seasons, and we're not talking about just crept over a G. We're talking about 1,300 yard seasons, multiple 1,300 yard seasons, a 1,200 yard season. I think there was an 11 in there too. So Gary Clark was absolutely the man for this organization, along with Arthur Monk and, of course, Ricky Sanders, which created the posse. Ricky Sanders, where's Ricky Sanders? We all remember that, right? I put Ricky Sanders on this list because of his Super Bowl performance in Super Bowl 22. He was outstanding. And as of today, he has the second most yards receiving in a Super Bowl game when he had 9 catches for 190, I think it was 93 yards against the Denver Broncos. So when you do it that big on that stage, and he was really good. And again, this guy had almost 6,000 yards receiving for this organization. It's not like he only did it in the postseason. So I think Ricky Sanders belongs on this list as well. And then, of course, the Tana Man, Santana Moss, one of the best to do it for this organization. Statistically, he's near the top of the list in terms of receiving yards for this organization. Hell, just the Monday Night Miracle itself is probably enough to get him on this list. But he was a damn good receiver for many, many years and holds the single season record for the most yardage by a Commanders Redskins receiver. So Santana Moss on this list as well. So in my mind, when I put together this list, I wanted an offense and a team that I felt like specifically offensively that could do everything. So if I needed to bludgeon someone to death with the run game, be able to hit you with different things, speed, power, combination of the two, I wanted to be able to do that, be physical at the point of attack. Obviously, we got the Hogs, we got the offensive line to get it done. I don't know if there's a better group of offensive linemen that you'll find assembled across the league. Of course, other teams have Hall of Fame offensive linemen and so forth and so forth. But if we can run it, if we got to drop back and sling it, we got Sammy Ball, we got Sonny Jurgensen, guys that, were known for throwing the football all around the yard. And then I want to be able to put receivers out there, tight ends, guys that can catch the football. So that was kind of my thought process as well. Speaking of which, as we go to the tight end position, we got 4 tight ends on this list. And I might get in trouble for this one. This is probably the most, I would say, controversial of my additions to this list, but I'm going to defend it till the cows come home. So Jerry Smith, one of the best tight ends, not just in this franchise's history, but one of the better tight ends receiving wise the league has ever seen. Don Warren, all-time great within this organization and was an extension of the Hogs. He was like another offensive lineman, was Don Warren, played for a lot of years. Chris Cooley, one of the best, statistically the best receiving tight end in franchise history. And then this is the one that I'm probably going to get knocked for, but Jordan Reed. Jordan Reed has the highest receiving tight end season in franchise history. That's number one. And number two, at his peak of his superpowers, when he was completely healthy, he was unguardable. You could not check Jordan Reed. You couldn't check him with the linebacker. You couldn't check him with the safety. Corners couldn't even stop Jordan Reed. Okay. And off the strength of that alone, He was one of the most athletically gifted tight ends I've ever seen play the position from a receiving standpoint. Okay. He was a basketball player playing the tight end position, and you couldn't stay in front of him. This guy would uncover like nobody's business. And because of that, I'm putting him on the list. You can kill me if you want to. I get it. I understand. And I may have left off someone that you think should be on this list, but I'm putting Jordan Reed on my list because if I'm throwing the football, who's stopping Jordan Reed? You know, if I'm spreading you out, I'm going empty set, 4 receivers and a tight end on the field, or 3 receivers, a tight end in the back. I feel really good about putting Jordan Reed out there and asking somebody to try to cover him one-on-one. Good luck. So I'm standing on business with Jordan Reed on my list of my all-time Commanders list. So we get to the offensive line, and this was really fun. But again, I thought it was pretty easy as well. The Hogs made it pretty easy. So the way I organized this was I wanted my starters from left to right, and then the list underneath them are the backups at each of those positions from left to right. So my starting left tackle is Trent Williams. Although he's not going to go in the Hall of Fame as a Redskin / Commander, we claim him. He may not claim us, but we still claim him. And he played enough years here for me to feel comfortable saying that he's a Redskin. So Trent Williams is my starting left tackle. Russ Grimm, Hall of Famer, is my left guard. Jeff Bostic, best center in franchise history, is my center. Joe Jacoby could play either left tackle, left guard, right guard. I'm going to, just for the sake of having the best 5 on the field, I'm putting him at right guard, is Joe Jacoby. Jake should be in the Hall of Fame as well. That's a travesty. He needs to get in before, he needs to get his cold one before he's not here to get it. He needs to be in the Hall of Fame. Make it happen. And then Jim Lachey is my starting right tackle. There may be some argument as to Jim Lachey, whether he should be starting, whether he should be, one of the reserves. I'm taking Jim Lachey, man, as my starting right tackle. He was one of the more athletically gifted tackles we've ever had. And that includes, Trent Williams in the mix. Lachey was a beast. I'm taking Jim Lachey as my right tackle. So Chris Samuels would be backing up Trent Williams at left tackle. Rollo McKenzie would be my backup left guard. Lynn Haas was the first real good center this organization had. He'll be backing up Jeff Bostic. Mark May was a part of the Hogs. He'll be my backup right guard. And George Stark, the boss hog, all right, who was a member of the Over the Hill gang initially, will be my backup right tackle. So, man, that's a hell of an offensive group there in terms of the offensive line. I feel really good about that group, and feel like we would be mauling some teams with these dudes up front, getting it done and moving the football at will with that offensive line group there. And I feel just as good about the guys on the bench. And there were so many other guys that I was very fond of, like Trey Johnson. You had Ed Simmons. There are a number of guys that probably could have ended up on this list that aren't on this list. For the more contemporary fan, John Jansen, right? So anyway, this is the best of the best, I think, the creme de la creme of the offensive line. So that is the offense. 28 players in all. A little excessive, I will admit. You probably could have shared with the defense a little bit more, but if we're building an all-time roster, I want the best of the best, and I think a lot of that resides on the offensive side of the football. So we continue on. We forge forward and get to the defensive side. We have 22 defensive players. All right. So a little light on the defensive side, I'll admit, but I still think it does not lack for quality. That's for sure. It may not have the quantity, but the quality is definitely still there. So speaking of quality, let's get to the defensive line. And I've got 8 defensive linemen here. Dexter Manley, to me, was the last dominant edge rusher this franchise has had. When you talk about destructive, game-wrecking edge rusher, he's the last one in franchise history. We haven't seen numbers like the one Dexter posted back in 1986. 18 and a half sacks. We haven't even seen anybody eclipse 14 sacks, 14 and a half sacks in this franchise since Dexter Manley's 18 and a half in 86. And there was a stretch there from 83 to 86 where Dexter was posting ridiculous numbers, 11 and 13 and 15 and then 18 and a half. There's a stretch there that we haven't seen replicated here in Washington since Dexter. All right. If you're talking about the best pass rusher in franchise history, I know that Ryan Kerrigan owns the sack record. Dexter Manley is the best pass rusher in franchise history, hands down. To me, that's not even a debate. Dave Butts, one of the best defensive tackles in franchise history, owns the record for sacks in franchise history from a defensive tackle standpoint at 56 and a half. He had an illustrious career here, and he's one of my two starting defensive tackles. Daron Payne will be joining him. So the first and one of only two current players to end up on this list. Daron Payne and Dave Butts are the only defensive tackles in franchise history to ever have. Well, I think there may have been one more. I got to check Sean Gilbert in 94. I think he had a massive season. I got to check Sean Gilbert out. I think that's how we were able to trade him. He might have had a double-digit sack season too. So I got to check that to make sure. But Dave Butts and Daron Payne each had 11 and a half sacks in their best seasons. For Butts, I think that was in 83. With Payne, obviously, that was back in 2022. So I really think Daron Payne, his best football is still ahead of him. When it's all said and done, him and Jonathan Allen could easily be approaching Dave Butts' franchise record for sacks from the defensive tackle position. Payne is at 30 sacks, I believe, and Allen is at 39. So they're each close to getting over 40 at this point of their careers, and there's still a lot of football left for both of them. So Payne would be my starter next to Butts, and then Charles Mann on the other side of Manley. Those guys, I wish I would have been able to watch them in real time instead of having to go back and watch them terrorize quarterbacks. That must have been a lot of fun, watching those two get off the edge and get to the quarterback. We haven't had a pairing like that. We were hoping, someone like myself, who was more of a contemporary fan of this team, I was hoping that Montez Sweat and Chase Young would be what Dexter Manley and Charles Mann were. Clearly, they didn't even come close to reaching that threshold. But Mann was an animal. He was a different guy, similar to Dexter Manley. Those dudes were all about business and getting the quarterbacks. So that's my starting group up front. Backing them up would be Ryan Kerrigan, Daryl Grant, Jonathan Allen, and Ken Harvey. Ken Harvey could be, put in as a linebacker. I like Ken Harvey, the pass rusher. My favorite Ken Harvey is him getting off the edge and getting to the quarterback. He had a massive season here in 94, getting to the quarterback. And the reason I make him a defensive end, Ken Harvey only spent 5 seasons here in Washington. In those 5 seasons, he amassed 41 and a half sacks. So including a 13 and a half sack season. So Ken Harvey was a model of consistency, a 13 and a half, a couple of 9-sack seasons in there too. I think a 9.5, a 9. So he came in and got right to work here in Washington, coming from the Cardinals. So that's my defensive line right there. And I feel really good about this group. Daryl Grant, great against the run. And you could argue after Rigo's touchdown run against the Dolphins in the Super Bowl, you could argue that World Grant's pick 6 against the Cowboys in the 83 championship game is probably the most iconic play in franchise history. After Rigo's touchdown run, obviously. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. It's definitely the most iconic defensive play. We'll just say it that way. Linebacker. I've got 5 linebackers. Easily could have been 6. I told you I debated between Sam Huff and Doug Williams. I don't consider Sam Huff a Redskin. I just don't. So take it for what it's worth. I told you I tried to make sure that the players on this list, one of my criteria is that you're actually considered a Redskin, or you played here long enough, or the damage that you did while you were here was great enough for me to have to override the fact that you didn't play the majority of your career here. I couldn't do it for Sam Huff. But the rest of these guys on this list, they'll suffice. Don't worry. Chris Hamburger is probably the most decorated linebacker in franchise history. I think this guy I think he made it to 9 Pro Bowls in his career. I could be wrong about that. I know that I think there was a stretch where he went to like 6 in a row. There's some all pros in there as well. This guy was a beast and helped this team get to the Super Bowl back in '72, their first Super Bowl appearance. So he's a starter for me at outside linebacker. London Fletcher is going to be El Capitan in the middle of the defense as my middle linebacker. We had some really good middle linebackers throughout the years, but I think London Fletcher was the most consistent here in Washington, and all of his Pro Bowls and his ability to not miss any games. He was a true Iron Man. Puts him on this list and makes him my starting middle linebacker, my Mike. And then Wilbur Marshall was an animal. Anybody that watched him play, one of my dad's favorite players, and again, you know, my dad is a Cowboys fan, but he loved Wilbur Marshall when he was with the Bears. He loved him even though he was a member of the Redskins. He always would talk to me about Wilbur Marshall and just how much of a beast he was. And when you watch him, man, there was a level of explosion with Wilbur Marshall that was just crazy to watch for, you know, the 80s. You just didn't see, and into the 90s, obviously the early 90s. He was a huge part of the 91 championship team, the best team in franchise history. And you could argue he was one of the best defensive players on that team. So Wilbur Marshall is my other starting outside linebacker. Then you have the ultimate Swiss Army knife utility man at linebacker, the one and only Monty Coleman, one of the longest tenured Redskins of all time. Monty Coleman, one of my favorite Redskins growing up. I caught the tail end of his career, but he was one of those guys that always showed up, and whatever you needed him to do, Monty was going to do it, right? You needed him to rush, you needed him to drop, you needed him to play special teams. You know, he never really truly got the credit he deserved because he wasn't a full-time starter all the time. But again, I call him the ultimate utility man. Whatever you needed, Monty Coleman could deliver. And then I had to put LeVar on this list because at his peak of his superpowers, there weren't many more ferocious and athletically gifted than LeVar Arrington. Those first 4 or 5 years of his career, that year with Marty, you know, the 11 sack year he had, there was a 6 forced fumble season he had, right? This guy was an animal. The pick 6 against the Panthers is always one that sticks out in my mind that turned around that 0-1 season with Marty. LeVar Arrington was an animal. When he first came out of Penn State, got to this team, he was a beast. And, you know, it sucks about the injuries. It sucks that he didn't get along with Greg Williams. But at the end of the day, when he was at the peak of his superpowers, LeVar Arrington was a monster. So athletically, he's one of the best linebackers we've ever seen grace the uniform for this organization. And so he's one of the reserve linebackers on this team. So we move on to the cornerback position, and I got 5 corners. Clearly, Darrell Green, who long overdue getting his jersey number retired this year with the organization. He's a Hall of Fame player, as we know. One of the best players in franchise history. If we were making and we've actually had this conversation, a week or two ago about Mount Rushmore. He's on the Mount Rushmore of Washington players, right? Darrell Green is not only one of the best players in franchise history, he's one of the best players in NFL history at the cornerback position. Champ Bailey, I struggled with this, man. I really didn't want to put him on this list. I didn't, because he's not a Redskin, right? And while he came back home not too long ago, which was good to see. And this is where he started his career. And damn, he was so good early, man. 5 interceptions in his rookie season, 5 interceptions in his second season. I remember that Arizona Cardinals game on a Sunday night, 3 interceptions, one of them to the crib. I love Champ Bailey. It's one of the biggest mistakes from a personnel standpoint that I think we've ever made. Joe Gibbs came in. He didn't want to be here, though. I mean, can't fault Joe for trading him. He didn't want to be here. And Joe was all about getting guys out of the program that didn't want to be here. And so, what could have been? He should have, again, much like Trent Williams, he should be going in the Hall of Fame as a commander, but he's not. He's gonna go in as a Bronco, and I'm okay with that. I had to put my feelings aside. The damage he did in those 5 years in Washington was enough to land him on this list. And those are my 2 starting corners, right? I mean, we had that at one point. Just let that sink in. Darrell Green, Champ Bailey were on the same team here in Washington. We had that at one point with Fred Smoot. Like, we had that. I think, as a matter of fact, I don't think Smoot was here yet. I don't think Smoot was here yet when Dion was here. I don't think he was here yet. But we had some nasty secondaries, man. In the late 90s, early 2000s. Damn, Champ Bailey was so good here. Mike Bass, legendary corner for this organization. Had some crazy years interceptions wise. Again, another guy that kind of helped turn this program around and got us to our first Super Bowl. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he scored the only points in that Super Bowl against the Dolphins. We lost 14-7. Think the Gary Upremian field goal that he botched and tried to throw and slipped out of his hands. I think Mike Bass was the one that scooped it up and ran it for a touchdown, if I'm not mistaken. But he's a damn good corner. So he's on the list. D'Angelo Hall is a guy that made a ton of plays here in Washington. And, it's funny because we've been bad for a long time. So it's hard to think about some of these guys who have been on the team here in the last 20 years or so that were any good. D'Angelo Hall was really good here, and he made a lot of plays. And it just sucks that a lot of the defenses he, was on weren't any good, and a lot of the teams he was on weren't any good. But he was really good, and it's unfortunate that a lot of his plays went in vain, so to speak. And then Pat Fisher, another guy that I kind of struggled with. Because he played a lot of his seasons in Arizona, but he played most of his career here in Washington, so it was okay. He just had some dominant years with the Cardinals. I think I said Arizona. It was Phoenix then, I think. It might have been, matter of fact, it was probably St. Louis back then, St. Louis Cardinals. I think he had like a 10 or 12 interception season with the Cardinals. Like, it's hard to overlook that, but he posted some big time numbers here in Washington. And when it's all said and done, he had more interceptions, I think, with Washington than he did Arizona or St. Louis. But whatever the case may be, he was damn good in both places, including here in Washington. So he's one of the 5 best corners to me in franchise history. And so you get to the safety position, and our starters, man, good luck getting the ball in with those 2 guys back there. You're talking about athletically and physically 2 of the greatest safeties in franchise history. Obviously, near and dear to my heart, Sean Taylor is going to be my starting free safety. athletically, I've never seen anybody before or since as gifted in that size and, height, weight, speed, and that type of package at 6'2" and some change, 215, 20 pounds, running the way he did, jumping the way that he did, ball skills. He was so graceful. I don't think you'll ever see someone play the position the way that Sean Taylor did. What's funny is a lot of people say, oh, a lot of his hits would have been illegal in today's NFL. No, they wouldn't have been. You go back and watch, there's a lot of clean hits, man. Helmet out of the way, smashing guys. Now, would he have gotten some defenseless receiver, penalties? Maybe, but they were clean hits, man. He's one of a kind, and there'll never be another one like Sean Taylor. And so, Ken Houston, another one of these elite, that's a Hall of Fame safety we're talking about there. Had some good years with the Houston Oilers. Had some really good years, probably great years with the Oilers, but came and was just as good here in Washington. And he's physical, just like Sean Taylor, ball skills, just like Sean Taylor. Just wasn't as big as Sean Taylor, but just as physically imposing, just as hawking, a ball hawk as Sean Taylor. You'd be hard pressed to put together a better group of safeties or a tandem at the safety position than those two. I feel damn good about those two starting. Paul Krause, I struggled with Paul. I really, truly did. He played a gajillion years with the Vikings, and he played like 4 or 5 with Washington, and then like 11 or 12 with the Vikings. And so I struggle with, but the damage he did in those first 5 years, what? I think his rookie season with Washington, I think he had like 10 interceptions or something crazy like that. Like, you can't dismiss what he did. In like 5 years, he had like 30 something, 36 interceptions in like 5 years with the organization. He's second in franchise history behind Darryl Green in interceptions. And he only played here 5 years. That's just to show you just how dominant he was in his limited time. I couldn't leave him off the list. I couldn't do it. And then Brig Owens is another guy that is, I think, 5th all-time in interceptions in franchise history. Another guy that was instrumental in, helping turn this organization around, getting us to our first Super Bowl back in 1972 against the Dolphins, and a really good safety. So he rounds out the safeties on this roster. So we finish up with our specialists. I'll make this short and sweet. I have 3 specialists, as you know. Punter is going to be Matt Turk. I struggled with that a little bit. I went back and forth with him and Tress Way, but Tress Way lacks the accolades that Matt Turk had. Turk, when he was in the league in Washington, there was a consensus that Matt Turk was the best punter in football. He had 3 straight years of Pro Bowls, and I think 2 of those 3 years, he was an All-Pro, right? So Tress Way has never seen that level of success. He's never been widely regarded as the best punter in football. We view him as one of the best punters in football, but there was no question that Matt Turk was the best punter in football in, the mid 90s, 96, 97, 98, right? Or, 97, 98, 99, somewhere in that neighborhood. I had to go with Matt Turk. And ultimately, Tress Way may supersede him and take over that spot. But for now, it's Matt Turk. And it might just remain Matt Turk for me. Mark Mosley, full disclosure, I'm a Chip Lohmiller guy, right? I'm a Chip Lohmiller guy. But Mark Mosley is the franchise leader all-time in points scored with over 1,200. Nobody else is even close. The next closest guy is at like 900, which is Chip Lohmiller. He's a league MVP back in 82. Like, that's a mic drop. A kicker winning league MVP. Drop the mic, move on. Mark Mosley's your place kicker for this organization. And then long snapper, if you get a nickname as a long snapper, I think that suffices. Ethan Albright, a.k.a. the Red Snapper, is your long snapper for this organization. think that about does it, right? So to recap, you got your 3 specialists, Matt Turk, Mark Mosley, Ethan Albright. Defensively, you've got 22 players. Dexter Manley, greatest edge rusher in franchise history. Dave Butts, technically and currently the best defensive tackle in franchise history. Deron Payne, Charles Mann are going to man up my defensive front as starters. Ryan Kerrigan, Daryl Grant, Jonathan Allen, and Ken Harvey will be backing those guys up. Chris Hamburger, London Fletcher, Chris Hamburger, Hall of Famer. London Fletcher could make an argument he's a Hall of Famer. Wilbur Marshall are my starting linebackers. Monty Coleman and LeVar Arrington will be backing them up. Darrell Green, Champ Bailey. You know what? As I look at that list of linebackers, probably could add Sam Huff because I don't actually have a backup Mike. He would be the backup Mike, right? Probably should add Sam Huff in there now that I'm thinking about it, just to give it some balance. Because you got LeVar as an outside backer, you got Monty as an outside backer. You need a middle backer. I could easily insert Sam Huff as the middle backer, so probably should do that. But I'd have to take somebody out. I already told you the discussion was Doug Williams. I have a hard time with that. If I had to go somewhere else, it'd probably be Ricky Sanders. But anyway, I digress. Corners, 5 of them, Darrell Green, Champ Bailey, are my starters. Mike Bass, D'Angelo Hall, and Pat Fisher will be backing them up. Safety, I've got 4. Sean Taylor, Ken Houston are my starters. Paul Krause and Brig Owens backing them up. When you get to the offense, 28 players in all, 4 quarterbacks. Sammy Ball is my starting quarterback. Sonny Jurgensen backing him up. Joe Theismann and Doug Williams. 4 running backs, Larry Brown, John Riggins, Brian Mitchell, Clinton Portis. John Riggins is my starting running back. Brian Mitchell would be my starting punt and kickoff return man. And then you've got the others filling in all of the gaps. Wide receiver, Bobby Mitchell, Charlie Taylor, Art Monk, Gary Clark, Ricky Sanders, Santana Moss. If I'm putting 3 receivers on the field, we'll call them my starters. You got Art Monk, Bobby Mitchell, and Gary Clark would probably be my 3 starting wide receivers, with Ricky Sanders, Santana Moss, and Charlie Taylor backing them up. Tight end, I got 4 of them: Jerry Smith, Don Warren, Chris Cooley, Jordan Reed. Depending on what we're looking to do is how I would utilize these tight ends. I'm looking to run the football. Probably going to have Don Warren and Chris Cooley out there. If I'm looking to throw the football, I'm going to probably have Chris Cooley, Jordan Reed, and Jerry Smith out there. So just depends on what you're looking to do, right? And then offensive line, that's where we shine and we specialize. Trent Williams, Russ Grimm, Jeff Bostic, Joe Jacoby, and Jim Lachey are my starting offensive linemen from left to right. So Trent Williams is my starting left tackle. Russ Grimm, my starting left guard. Jeff Bostic, starting center. Joe Jacoby, starting right guard. Jim Lachey, starting right tackle. Chris Samuels is backing up Trent Williams. Raleigh McKenzie, Rollo, backing up Russ Grimm. Lynn Haas is backing up Jeff Bostic. Mark May backing up Joe Jacoby. And George Stark, the boss hog, backing up Jim Lachey at right tackle. That is my all-time roster for the Washington Commanders / Redskins. You tell me, where did I go wrong? Where did I go right? What would you alter? What would you change? Put a lot of thought into this. Felt like I nailed it. Again, there's a couple of tweaks. I think I need to put Sam Huff in there just to have more balance at linebacker. Then I'd have to take somebody out. As I mentioned, probably lean towards taking out Ricky Sanders. I don't want to take Doug Williams out. But if I had to, I'd probably take one of those 2 guys out, either Doug Williams or Ricky Sanders. Where's Ricky Sanders? That's what you might be asking if I take him out. But anyway, that's going to do it for me, your man Louie Tee here, on this installment of the or hear me. That'll do it for me on this Bleacher Report exclusive 53-man all-time roster for the Commanders. I think we nailed it. I think we nailed it. All right. Or I think I nailed it. So anyway, I digress. You guys let me know what you think. And I'll see you guys next time. You guys have a good one. Take care. See you next time.